Elon Musk, who recently foreshadowed his interest in a social media platform that actually allowed open discourse, has now reported that he owns 9.2% of Twitter's stock, and he's obtained a seat on Twitter's board. Given the lag in SEC reporting requirements, it's all but certain that Elon's actual stake is now far larger than that. Elon's stake in Twitter, a primary source of political discourse, represents a potentially seismic shift in our political landscape. The removal, or even a loosening of Twitter's restrictions and overt political biases would allow for the possibility of open discussion and the true representation of all ideas and opinions. Imagine the impact. No censorship effects. The thing that Washington elites most fear. But Elon's stake in Twitter also highlights the dire state of our nation's politics, that it requires the actions of a rogue billionaire who resides outside of Washington's elite club to rescue free speech in this country is fundamentally alarming. Hi everyone, and welcome to Truth Over News with Jeff Carlson and Hans Manka.
Elon Musk's new stake in Twitter heralds the potential for a resurgence of free speech. Despite the emergence of various similar platforms such as Parler, Gab, and most lately Truth Social, Twitter remains the primary public town square where ordinary citizens can voice their views and engage and interact with the elite, with the rich, and with the powerful. Twitter represents a unique system that is a platform and an incubator of ideas that greatly advance public discussion. What Elon appears to understand is that you're not paying for the platform, you're paying for the people that use it. The greatest failing of Twitter Lite companies is that they become an echo chamber of like-minded ideas. And quite frankly, that doesn't advance the public discourse. Most folks just want equal treatment. Remove the partisan censorship and let the ideas and opinions sort themselves out. As Elon recently observed, failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy. Elon concluded by asking, what should be done? It now appears that Elon has answered his own question. Rather than start yet another Twitter copycat company, Elon's answer is to take control of Twitter itself.
But the fact that we are now cheering Elon's arrival, the replacement of bad tech oligarchs with a good one, highlights a very basic problem. How do we come to a point where we are required to rely on one man to overturn the actions of big tech and the ineptitude and corruption of our federal government? To understand how we've arrived at this place, we have to go back to a time before social media, 1996 to be precise. It was in that year that Congress passed Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. This law exempted social media companies from liability for what their users post. Despite what many say, without Section 230, big social media companies could simply not exist. Their entire business model is fundamentally premised on the language contained within Section 230. The initial thinking behind the drafting of Section 230, which was created in a far more innocent time, was to exempt and shield young social media companies from legal liability, but only if they did not discriminate among users. Promising young tech companies were allowed to grow without fear of hindrance from spurious lawsuits. But this giant loophole allowed those same companies to control our political discourse as they grew into giants. We've now arrived at a dangerous point where social media companies get the full benefits of legal indemnity, while at the same time they are allowed to discriminate among their users. And in doing so, they control political discourse and debate in our nation in the process.
How did this happen? How did we cede control of our speech to the oligarchs of big tech? The answer is that Congress, intentionally or otherwise, made a fundamental mistake in how it worded Section 230. It's understandable that Congress wanted to give growing social media companies the legal option to cut out lewd and obscene content from its sites, but the provision drafted by Congress contained a carve-out that completely altered the intent of Section 230, a wording that included two very simple words: Otherwise objectionable. Otherwise objectionable is a catch-all phrase which is intentionally open to interpretation. It can literally mean anything the tech giants want it to mean. Said differently, social media companies were allowed to serve as the objector, and in this newfound role, they became the determiners of content. And with the use of that phrase, social media's right to discriminate against certain content was effectively extended to any content. The logical extension of this thinking was evolutionary. It did not happen all at once, but as big tech began to realize the extensions of this newfound power, there were suddenly no limits to what the people running these companies might find objectionable. As we found out in 2020 and 2021, their objections and censorship could extend far beyond what was originally envisioned.
Of course, Section 230 is not the only reason that we now find ourselves in this situation. Long before political correctness entered the public lexicon, George Orwell noted that in a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Or as Voltaire wisely stated, to learn who rules over you, find out whom you are not allowed to criticize. Communists supposedly used the phrase correct thinking back in the 1920s as a means to force members to hold the party's ideological line. William Safire first wrote of the phrase politically correct in a 1991 column in the New York Times. He noted that the origin is in correct thinking and stemmed from a 1963 writing by Chairman Mao, "Where do correct ideas come from?" Safire highlighted Mao's answer, "They come from social practice and from it alone." In an Orwellian parallel to Mao's statement, our own government has recently teamed up with big tech companies in its efforts to censor and suppress the free speech rights of individual Americans. The president's own press secretary has called upon the cooperation from big tech in the censorship of free speech, going so far as to reveal that the federal government tracks social media posts, which it then flags to the social media companies.
We are in regular touch with these social media platforms. We've increased disinformation research and tracking within the Surgeon General's office. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook.
Psaki's admission is a flagrant violation of the First Amendment, which prohibits the government from taking measures to police speech. It's a testament to our times that the Supreme Court has not directly addressed this issue.